I'm going to share a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. My name, again, is Mara Walsh. I am in the United States and specifically between Philadelphia and New York, which is on the East Coast. I started leading physical tours with EF Tours as a Girl Scout leader, taking girls and their families to international destinations every summer. I have since expanded my physical travel program. Now I also lead adult-only tours with EF Go Ahead Tours, which is their adult division, as well as several other organizations. I also offer family-friendly tours. These are tours that are geared towards teens through senior citizens. They're a little bit faster paced and they're a lot of fun. And as a certified travel agent, I can also book you on a dream trip as part of a group or on your own. So if you are thinking about traveling again and you want some assistance or you would love to join a group that I have or one of my colleagues' groups, just feel free to email me and I can hook you up with the appropriate tour. In terms of virtual tours, there's a couple of reasons why I started this series. I really wanted to support the tour director community during this time of travel restrictions where they have not been able to work. And I really wanted to keep travel alive for my group and give them the opportunity to keep learning and experiencing different parts of the world. We have since given that opportunity to our friends, our families. We've shared it on social media, and we have grown into a wonderful group of travelers each week. I've done more than 40 or 45 virtual tours in the last year since COVID struck. If you'd like to access any of those recordings, you can do that via my website, which is girltraveltours.com. There's a vertical toolbar that says virtual tours, and you can click on that and you can access any tour that we've recorded in the last year and a half. I also have a YouTube channel. If you want to search for Girl Travel Tours and virtual tour presentations, you will see the list of virtual tours as well as on my Facebook page. So we have several more tours that are going to be coming up in the future. I'm going to put a list of them on the screen so that you can see if you would like to register for them. We're off to Jerusalem next week, New England, Brittany and Mont Saint-Michel, Victorian London, Yellowstone National Park, Communism in the Eastern Bloc, Salzburg, Milan, Mystery in Transylvania, Northern Spain, Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, and Patagonia in Argentina. Check back to register for the newly added destinations. They are all up on my website right now, so you can get in and register for them so that you can be reminded of the tour date through an email that will come through the day before. As long as you're interested in viewing these virtual tour presentations, we will continue to produce them for you. I know many of you have found our virtual tours through Facebook and my Facebook group. I just wanted to once again give a shout out and warn everybody about the scammers on Facebook. If you did pay a fee to access this tour, you were subjected to the scammers that gave you a link on Facebook. My tours are not, we don't charge for access to these tours. They are free to attend. So if you did do that and you gave a credit card, you may want to double check your credit card payments and also make sure that you don't have to cancel your card because of somebody's access to your credit card. Okay, so you can always safely access our events through my website, again, girltraveltours.com. If you're interested in seeing the recordings, as I said, you can also get them through that site. Okay, before we get going, I wanted to share a few ways for you to interact with us on Zoom. There is a Q&A toolbar. Could you please save that for questions that you would like the tour director to answer after the tour and questions about maybe my groups or my tours that I do? I'd be happy to answer them through the Q&A. The chat you can use to chat with me or to drop a point of interest during the tour. I love to read and hear from all of you during the presentations. I also always love to launch an interactive poll during our presentation. So let's do that now and get started with everybody. What's your connection to Western Scotland? I have been and loved it. I have a trip booked. I plan to go in the future. I have no set plans, but I'm interested in the location, or I am solely interested in experiencing it virtually. You have about 50% of our audience that have answered this so far. I'm going to give you a moment or two to see, but it looks like there have been a decent amount of people who have been to Western Scotland and love it. I'm going to share the results so that you can see it. The majority of people, with about 34%, have no set plans, but they're very interested in the location. And then there's a decent amount of people, almost 30%, that have been and loved it. So we're going to try to change that. I'm just interested in the location and I have future plans to grow those percentages. And hopefully our tour director today will get that done. I'm going to stop sharing so that you don't have that in front of your screen. Okay. Today's tour and all of our tours are scheduled for 90 minutes. Plus the Q&A. So I hope that you're ready with a snack or a drink in hand and you're ready for the next 90 minutes. A tour would not be complete without a fantastic tour director. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with group travel, a tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with your group from start to finish and shares a world of knowledge, manages all your travel plans, and makes sure that your experience is full of education, it's stressless, and it's easy to navigate. These tour directors are by far the most important people in our group. I'll share with you via chat and during the Q&A how you can tip the tour director if you are so inclined. All of the tips go directly to the tour director once collected, minus the Zoom operating expenses. I'm hoping that this virtual tour will not only keep our desire to travel alive until it's possible for most of us to travel again, but also it allows a tour director to do what he does best, which is share his knowledge and passion for travel. Today, we're lucky to have back a fan favorite who will be sharing his hometown and his country with us. We have Austin back with us from Western Scotland. He's super passionate about his region of the country, and you'll soon be impressed with his knowledge. So if you'd like, I will welcome you, Austin. You can join us here and I will hand over the event to you and you can share your screen and welcome the audience.
Fantastic, Mara. Mara, I have one question for you before we start.
Sure.
Because Frank Van Veen asked why your t-shirt says Oakville.
So Oakville is our division of the Girl Scouts where we come from in Pennsylvania. And I like to digress. Everybody who knows me knows that, but Oak comes from Big Oak Road and Ville comes from Marsville. And our area of Girl Scouts covers from Big Oak Road to Marsville. But I always give a shout out to you folks from Oakville, Ontario, right? Canada, because I know that you guys have a town and some of you even dial into our presentation. So hello from our Oakville to your Oakville.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I just saw that at the bottom while I was waiting to start. So thank you very much. So I'm going to share screen now. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. So we're going to put this guy up and we're going to go back to the start. And then I'm going to open this up and we're going to go back. So hello, everyone. Mara, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me back. Really quickly before I actually get started, Doug Murray, Slanjavar. Doug sent a little message earlier on that said Slanjavar, and I'm just returning his cheers. I'm only drinking water at the moment, but Doug, thank you for that message. Hello to the people, particularly in Austin, Texas, close to my heart because it's my name. And there's a lady who came on called Wendy Macbeth, who grew up in the west of Scotland. I hope I have something for you in here as Wendy. And I'm going to mention a couple of other people. Mary Wynne Milne, who's half Scottish, hello as well. And there's a lady, I think she's in Ontario, called Sarah Milliken. And the name stuck with me because there's a very famous English comedian also called Sarah Milliken. So hello, everybody. Yes, as Mara says, my name is Austin. I recently did a tour for Mara a few months ago about Iceland, and I did that tour sitting in my home in Scotland. And today I find myself doing a tour for you about Scotland, and genuinely I'm sitting in Iceland. I have managed to come here and have one single tour this year for EF Tours, and I have a fabulous group from Michigan, from California, and from Texas, and we are going around the southeast of Iceland. So I'm very, very, very pleased to be here. Thank you so much for joining me. So tonight, I wanted to talk about, there are two fabulous tours on here already about Scotland, but it's more about Edinburgh, the places everybody goes to, and the Highlands of Scotland and the places that people go to. So I wanted to talk about the West Coast, the islands, the rugged side, and my hometown of Glasgow, which I love very, very deeply. So here we are. Let me get started. I did this with my last tour. I really like to put things in perspective. So for anyone who's not quite clear exactly where Scotland is, here we are looking down from the North Pole, just above Scotland there. The little orange dot, orangey yellow dot is Scotland. And just above it there, the little white bit there is Iceland. That's where I currently am. The United States is over here. Apologies, I saw some people from Canberra tuning in as well. I've not managed to get the Antipodes in there as well. Somebody also asked at the beginning how long this talk is. I have done it a couple of times privately. It's about 1 hour 10 minutes to 1 hour 15 minutes if I can just stop waffling. So here we are. Here is Scotland. What is Scotland? So Scotland is not yet an independent country. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Here is the map here. It comprises the 4 kingdoms of Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland. We're all part of the same country. Scotland, you may know, has been trying to become independent in the last few years. We have not been successful. The majority of people are not ready for it yet. So here we are. Little bit about Scotland in general. The population is around about 5.5 million. We are mainly very white and Protestant Presbyterian, but all races and religions are represented in our society. The reason I put the word very in there is more to do with the fact that we get almost no sun. So we have no tan, and we are, as what we call, peely wally. We're very, very light skinned, though I've managed to get a tiny little bit of a tan in the last few days. So that's not a reflection on the society. We have a very mixed multicultural society in Scotland. And also the West Coast and the Highlands, which is what we're kind of going to look at today, has the lowest population density of in population in the whole of Europe. And that's to do with a little biting insect called the midge, which is kind of related to the mosquito, but it's much, much worse if you've ever experienced it up in the north of Scotland. So what are the main industries? We'll just cover this just really briefly, and I'll mention this as we go. So oil and gas, but that's all on the East Coast. I won't be talking about that tonight. Tourism, what I'm involved with, what loads of people are involved with all through Scotland. The fishing industry, you're going to see that all the way down the West Coast as we go. Whisky, of course. We export a huge £4.4 billion worth of whisky every year. Tartan and Tweed, I'm going to talk about that in a second. Information technology, we have lots and lots of computer companies in Scotland, particularly on the East Coast over in Dundee. And financial services has become very, very important to Scotland, all down the West Coast as well. So what I'm going to actually officially talk about, we're talking about everything on the left-hand side of this picture as you look at it. The Outer Hebrides, which are the islands all up here at the top. Then I'm going to talk about the Inner Hebrides, that is these mountains, these islands all the way down the inside of this red line here. Then I'm going to talk about the West Coast. So we're going to look at a few places along the west side. We're going to look at this big, long sort of, I'm going to use the word pendulous, guys. This pendulous bit at the bottom of Scotland, that's the Mull of Kintyre there. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about my hometown of Glasgow. So let's start with the Outer Hebrides. Here they are here. All of this map is written in Scots Gaelic. Now, in Ireland, they speak Gaelic. In Scotland, we speak Gaelic, and they only really do it in the Highlands and Islands, so I'm not a Gaelic speaker myself. So from north to south, we have the largest island in the whole of the British Isles, which is the island of Lewis and Harris. Below it, Just there you have North Uist, in between there, Benbecula, South Uist, Barra and Battersea. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about these islands. They're very remote, but they're incredibly beautiful. So let's start with the island of Lewis and Harris. Now, a lot of people think that Lewis and Harris are two separate islands. They are not. They are two territories on one island. You can see here, Lewis is at the top, and Harris, north and south, are at the bottom. They are completely connected. They are the largest island off the coast of Great Britain. They are very, very remote, and their main town is the port of Stornoway that you can see up at the top there. They are beautiful. Now you're going to see a lot, you're going to be fed up with these pictures. They have a lot of pictures, all like this. These are the beautiful silver sand beaches caught on the one day of the year where the sun shone and the sheep decided to come out for a little walk. We also have another beautiful beach on Harris here. This is looking south and looking down towards North Uist as well. So these beautiful, beautiful beaches. Also, islands around the main island of big land masses were usually more populated very early on by early man. Thousands of years ago. Orkney and Shetland up on the top of Scotland are more populated, and Lewis and Harris were very early populated areas of Scotland, more than the mainland. And we know this because we have things like this on the island. This is the Callanish standing stones, Callanish standing stones. These are potentially 3,500 years old. If you know Stonehenge down in Somerset in England, these are a bunch of standing stones. They're clearly put there for a reason, but because it's so far away and beyond recorded history, nobody knows why they're there, but they're very, very spiritual, beautiful places. Now, if you know the Isle of Harris, you may have heard of the capital, Stornoway, which is here. Stornoway has a fishing fleet, and as you can see from Mara's original print at the beginning, at the top of this talk, you have these beautiful painted buildings. They paint the buildings because they get so lashed by the sea that they become very, very discoloured anyway, so it's easier to paint them and keep them clean. Stornoway is the capital up there, and it's full of a fishing fleet. Harris, the bottom part, you will probably know from Harris tweed. Harris tweed is a woven fabric. It's mostly actually woven on Lewis in the northern part, but it's one of these protected materials. It can only be called Harris tweed if it is produced on the islands of Lewis and Harris by a local weaver with the wool from the local sheep and local dyes. And when you've made a piece of Harris tweed, you turn it into a beautiful jacket and waistcoat like this. Absolutely fantastic material, very, very hard wearing, very warm, quite breathable in the summer as well. And it's only official Harris and tweed if it's made up there, and it has this bumper in the bottom corner. So that's the Harris tweed official bumper. Every metre of cloth has that on it, and it has the orb and sceptre symbol on it. In practicality, let me show you some stuff about Harris tweed. Every year in Glasgow at the end of August, we stage, friends of mine and lots of other people stage a ride called the Harris Tweed Ride. This is in Glasgow. Now, this is us about to set off a few years ago. We all put on lovely Harris Tweed clothes. We get our vintage bicycles out, and we spend the afternoon, a Sunday afternoon in Glasgow, riding about the city. There is myself on the left-hand side in my full Harris Tweed outfit, my friend Campbell on the right-hand side, and his pal Graham in the centre. We get ourselves dressed up like dandies and we go around the city. This is me on the same ride with my wife in her beautiful Harris Tweed outfits. Yes, guys, I am punching above my weight with my wife. We go around here and it's a charity bicycle ride. Oh, what have I done? There we are, beg your pardon. Just like a little close-up of my wife's fascinator that she's wearing. Her name's Jess. The fascinator is made out of pheasant feathers, and pheasant is obviously one of the birds that you find all over Scotland. So we do this for charity. One more picture of me looking dapper. We do it for a charity called the Linda Norgrove Foundation. Linda Norgrove came from the Isle of Harris. She was a Christian missionary nurse who went off to work in Afghanistan in the early 2000s after the war. And she was captured by the Taliban, ransomed, and then executed. So she gave her life for a good cause. So we go out and we raise money for her charity, which is for a Christian missionary charity as well. So coming down, we've been coming from Lewis and Harris. We now have North Uist, Benbecula in the middle, and South Uist. Now, I want to talk about one specific thing. Let's have a little look at these islands, North Uist at the top here and South Uist at the bottom. So beautiful, beautiful golden sands, silver sands, and beautiful bays. There is one very, very specific thing I'd like to talk about, and it's about South Uist. Now, fans of the television programme Outlander may know this lady on the left. This is Flora MacDonald, and she came from the island of South Uist. Now, during the late 17th and mid 18th century, you may know that the Jacobites, the Scots Stuart cause within the United Kingdom, were fighting the British government, trying to put their king, Bonnie Prince Charlie, back on the throne. The Stuart family were deposed in 1688, and since then they had been fighting. Bonnie Prince Charlie had had a huge campaign between 1745 and 1746, and he was finally defeated at Culloden in 1746, and he was forced to flee. One of the places he fled to was the island of Benbecula, which is the island between North and South Uist. And while he was there, he met this beautiful woman, Flora MacDonald. She was beautiful, she was striking, and she helped him to escape. So if you know the Skye boat song, and you know the tune that goes, "Speed bonny boat like a bird on the wing, on with the sailor's cry, carry the lad that was born to be king over the sea to Skye." Well, that journey, you may not realise, wasn't from the mainland to Skye. It was from the island of Benbecula in the Outer Hebrides over to Skye, taking him closer to the mainland, because he spent 5 months in Scotland trying to evade his captors. So here's a little picture of Outlander for anyone who doesn't know. Handsome Sam Hewen there on the extreme right-hand side. Outlander reflects a lot of this stories. I'm not a huge fan, but I will say this, it gets an awful lot of the history of Scotland absolutely spot on. And even when they go off to the United States, that reflects the story of Flora MacDonald, who actually did, after all of this, when she evaded capture, she went off to the United States and she lived out the rest of her life farming there. So there is the trip that she made with 6 other sailors in the boat. She went from Benbecula over to, this is the island of Skye. We're going to talk about Skye in a little minute as well when we get to the Inner Hebrides. So that's the story really quickly. I'm not going to dwell on the Jacobites. I'll answer questions on them later, but most of that happened in the Highlands, and that's not where we're talking about tonight. Flora MacDonald. I said she lived out the rest of her life in America. That is actually true, but she came home shortly before she died, and she died on Skye, and she is buried in Kilmuir, which is in the very, very north of Skye, and this is her grave. And her name will be mentioned in history, and if courage and fidelity be virtues, mentioned with honour. So I've been to this grave. It's absolutely beautiful on the windswept north coast of Skye. And strangely enough, if you're a fan of high fashion, the fashion designer Alexander McQueen is also buried in the same graveyard in Kilmuir. He was an English boy, but he had Scottish roots. He made these most amazing, amazing dresses, such an imagination, such a talent. And he died very early at the age of 39. And he is also buried in Kilmuir on Skye. But back to the Outer Hebrides. One more particular island I would like to speak to you about, Barra. This is the sort of second southernmost of the Outer Hebrides. It's a beautiful island. It's particularly famous for its beaches. They all look the same, guys. I know they do, but this is absolutely fantastic. And the other thing it's particularly famous for is that the airport is the beach. So you land on the beach. I know that you probably have that in the Caribbean as well, but people land their airplanes on the beach here. So if you're coming up from Glasgow, you can get a flight all the way up. It's a beautiful, beautiful island. And because it's in the Outer Hebrides and it benefits from the Gulf Stream, when you go to Barra, you get images like this. You get palm trees growing left and right on beautiful verdant greenery all around. There is the ferry in at the port of Barra. So that's the last thing I want to say about the Outer Hebrides. I think we're going to come in now to the Inner Hebrides. So on the Inner Hebrides, the first place I'd like to talk about is the Isle of Skye and Eilean Scigannath, and that means the Winged Isle. So the name probably comes, it's in Scots Gaelic now, but it probably comes through Norse, because the Vikings were all over this island. The capital is Portree. You can see it in the middle, just to the right. And we're also going to talk about Dunvegan later on. You can see that up to the left. And we're going to talk right down in the bottom. It's just off, it's just down at the bottom here, the part that says Sleat. So Skye is the second largest island off the coast of the United Kingdom. The Lewis and Harris were the largest. This is the second largest. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful island. So much going on it. I told you about the Skye boat song, about the Bonnie Prince Charlie being rowed over the sea to Skye. Well, now you don't even have to take a boat to get onto Skye. You have the Skye Bridge here. Really, really beautiful bridge. It was opened in the early 1990s. It started off as a toll bridge, so you had to pay to go across. And as you went across, once it was all paid for, they just turned it into a free bridge. So we go over this all the time and get on to Skye. And once you're on Skye, you might go up to the county town, the capital of Skye. This is Portree, and Portree is beautiful. It's right down by the harbour. It has a fishing fleet. It has a beautiful Presbyterian church in the background as well. And in fact, during the time that Bonnie Prince Charlie was fleeing the English, which was known as the Flight Across the Heather, which is the plant that you see all over the north of Scotland, he spent some time hiding in the Portree Hotel, which is just the building at the back there, just behind the church. The next thing I'd like to show you here is the slide that I used at the beginning. This is some standing stones. They're a natural occurrence. They stand just on the west coast of Skye, and they are known as the Old Man of Storr. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the mythology of it, but the story goes that a young man and his wife every year on her birthday would come up the hill here and look out above the plain. And the man would tell the wife a beautiful story. And every year they would do it, and every year they would come back and he would tell the wife another story. And eventually, as they got old, the wife died and the old man came up by himself. And the elves who had been listening to him all these years, telling the story to his wife, finally came out and they spoke to him. They said, "Where is your wife?" And he said, "My wife has died. I've come by myself." And they said, "Right, well, we are going to reunite you." And they made two standing stones of his wife and the man, and they stand there for all eternity. So that's the Old Man of Storr. It's a great walk to get up to. This is an amazing bit of stone. This is Neist Point Lighthouse, Skye, and this is right up in the north of the country, right off the northern tip. This huge, huge piece of igneous rock there. Just some amazing scenery. I spent an evening up there with a friend in a camper van. We nearly got blown off that headland. It was very, very scary, but we had an amazing time. Very famously on Skye as well, you have this place here, which is the fairy pools. So I've mentioned fairies before, just there in the Old Man of Storr. The people of Scotland really still believe really quite a lot in fairies. You find that also up here in Iceland, that they believe in fairies, but that's because they stole lots of Scottish women to bring here. So all the folk tales are up here. The fairy pools are right in the centre of Skye. You have to take quite a walk to get to them. You can't get in by bus, so you have to go and walk to them, but they're absolutely stunning looking. And one last bit of scenery before we move on. These are the Black Coolin Mountains. They are igneous rock. They have got lots and lots of iron in them. This is why you can see lots of red in the black as well. These mountains are absolutely stunning, and you see them just as you come onto the island of Skye. Really fantastic place. Excuse me. Oh, I'd just like to mention hello to Jean Golden, who says her family were from Skye as well. I'd written that down at the beginning, Jean. Thank you so much for coming along. The last thing I wanted to show you, this fabulous photograph. This is on the west coast of Skye as well, and this is called Kilt Rock. So if you imagine a kilt, it's flat at the front and it's pleated at the back, and this is called Kilt Rock. It's off the west coast of Skye. It's an absolutely fantastic place. It has a waterfall coming off it again, and it has all these basalt columns coming down. We'll see basalt columns again as we move through the country. But these are basalt columns, which means they are igneous rock, which means they come from a volcanic eruption. And there's this amazing look off here. And it's called Kilt Rock because people think it looks like the pleated back of a kilt. I said I would mention Dunvegan. Now, Dunvegan Castle is the castle of one of the major clans, one of the major families, one of the major Scottish families on Skye. They are in the north of the country, and they are of the island, beg your pardon, and they are a major clan. They're based out there, and their castle is Dunvegan. When you look inside Dunvegan Castle, it's really quite special inside, even the staircase there. And on the left-hand side, they have a battle flag, and the battle flag is known as the fairy flag of Clan MacLeod, and it was found in a peat bog, and it was thought to belong to the fairies. It has been used twice in battle by Clan MacLeod. They have unfurled it when they were facing overwhelming odds and then won a battle, and they say that it will be unfurled one more time for another battle to save Clan MacLeod. So Clan MacLeod's huge rivals in the south of the island were Clan Donald or Clan MacDonald, and they are in Sleat, which is the bottom part of the island. Clan Donald are huge. The MacDonalds, you may have heard of them. You may have heard of the massacre of Glencoe, which was the MacDonalds being massacred by Clan Campbell. Again, that's further into the country. You'll have heard it on here at least a couple of times by my esteemed colleagues who have told you about it. But Clan Donald or Clan MacDonald stretched all the way up to the Isle of Skye as well, and their major rivals were the MacLeods. This is Armadale Castle. It's actually now just a ruin. It was the home of Clan Donald, but it has these beautiful gardens around it, and that's looking across to the Scottish mainland there from Sleat on the bottom corner of Skye. A quick word. So I've mentioned clan a couple of times. So we have Clan MacDonald and we have Clan MacLeod. Up here in the top left-hand corner, you can see hopefully the shape of Skye. It's easy to pick out because there's also a word that says McKinnon at the top, which is the third clan on Skye. And you can see their different areas there. So as I mentioned, clan means family because it comes from a Gaelic word which means children. And children obviously make up a family, and all over Scotland you have different clans. Excuse me, my clan, you can't actually quite read it. It's just very close to Glasgow, and I am part of Clan Buchanan. I'm a sigil part of that, which means I am related to Clan Buchanan down my mother's side. So you see all the different families, all the different clans, and where they are in Scotland. You can see the very, very large Campbell there. right in the middle of the screen. And then if you look up to the left, you see a lot of McDonald's, McLean's, McKinnon's, and MacLeod. Mac just means son of or grandson of. So that's the clans. They all have their own tartans. We're not going to really go into that tonight. The next island I'd like you to look at, and when I was doing this and I came back to do it, I looked at it and went, oh, I've put Skye in again. No, it's not. This is the Isle of Mull, and Mull is further south from Skye. It's a similar size, maybe a little bit smaller, and its capital up the top here is Tobermory. It's just off the west coast, right beside a town called Oban that I'm going to talk about later. And what I wanted to put in, first of all, there's a couple of really beautiful things on Skye, and they're both waterfalls. I'm going to show you them first. Sorry, I'm going to show you Tobermory first. This is the capital, and you can see lots more painted buildings there as well. Tobermory is on the west coast, right at the top. And just in case, I think there's a couple of British people watching. This was the setting for a kids' television programme in the United Kingdom called Balamory, which was really, really successful. British people will know that straight away, and maybe some Northern Americans and maybe some Australians as well. So Tobermory is the capital, and then you have these absolutely beautiful waterfalls on Mull. But what I really wanted to talk about Mull was about a couple of things that are off the coast. So a couple of islands, very small islands that are off the edge of Mull. And the first one I want to talk about is this island here, and it's called Staffa. It's uninhabited. It is a bird sanctuary, but again, it has these amazing basalt column formations all the way through it. I see this in Iceland, and you probably recognizing it from Northern Ireland. I'll come on to it in a minute. So Staffa is a volcanic island. It's risen out from huge volcanic eruptions, and it's made these amazing basalt stacks. There is a cave just to the right there, and that cave is called Fingal's Cave, and that's what it looks like inside. The Austrian musician Felix Mendelssohn did a grand tour of Europe in the 18th century, and he came to Staffa and he took a boat ride and came into Fingal's Cave, and he wrote a piece of music called the Hebridean Overture, and while he was there, and part of it is called Fingal's Cave. You may, as I said, you may realise it looks very much like here in Northern Ireland, this is the Giant's Causeway, and that's because they are basically related. There's all of these basalt stacks all the way up this part of Ireland and Scotland. If you're a geologist, you know it's all geology, and it's all about how the rocks cool very, very slowly over many, many hundreds of years and form these hexagonal and pentagonal shapes. But if you're into myths, the story goes that there was a giant in Scotland called Ben Droner, and there was a giant in Ireland called Finn McCool. And Finn McCool and Ben Droner had an argument, and they wanted to fight it out, but there was the sea separating them. So the story goes that Finn McCool created this causeway to take him all the way to Scotland, to the island of Staffa, so that he could fight Ben Droner. So that's the myth about it there. So in Northern Ireland, you have this amazing Giant's Causeway, which I hope many of you have been to. I've been to it lots and lots of times. It's absolutely beautiful. And in Scotland, reflected up there, you have Staffa, which is the same configuration. The other island I wanted to talk about was one that's kind of a little bit personal to me. Now, I'm not very religious myself, but my best friend is the son of a Church of Scotland minister, and I've spent a lot of time in churches, and we used to go up here all the time. So there's a tiny, beautiful little island off the coast of Mull called Iona, and on there, there's an abbey, and the abbey was in ruins for centuries, but it was re-established in the 1950s by the Iona community, part of the Church of Scotland. And now this is a working abbey. It is predominantly Protestant Presbyterian, but again, it's essentially non-denominational. Any religions are welcome to come and visit and come and stay. The reason Iona is such a religious place as well is because it was pretty much the first place in Scotland that was colonised by Irish monks who were coming to spread Christianity within the community. And the monk that came to Iona was a man called Saint Columba. And he sailed in little coracle boats from Ireland. And he came up and he eventually found the island of Iona and he thought it was beautiful. And the story goes that he got off at this beach and he looked back to see where he had come from. And it was the first time he had looked back and he could no longer see Ireland. So he wept. He wept because he couldn't see Ireland, but he knew that this was where he was going to stop. So when you're on this beach in Iona and you're looking south and you're looking at the water's edge, there are all these pebbles and many of them are blue and they're known as St. Columba's tears. And that's because he wept on that beach because he could no longer see Ireland. So that's the next one. That's Mull, Iona and Staffa and all the basalt columns. The next two islands I want to talk about are Jura up here. And let's leave the name of this one for a second. So Jura is the next island. It's a fantastically beautiful island. They all are. There's another one of these fabulous beaches. You must be getting fed up with them by now. You really must. But Jura, again, has these wonderful mountains in the back here. They are called the Paps of Jura. Pap is an old English Scots word for boobs. So they are called the Paps of Jura for the very obvious reasons. Jura lies just off the coast of the mainland of Scotland, and it's famous for a couple of things. Number one, it has a very, very dangerous and famous water feature. It has a whirlpool called the Corrie Vrecken Whirlpool. Very dangerous. It's all shifting tides, and it's really, really a dangerous place to get anywhere near. And the second thing it's kind of really famous for is in the 20th century, this guy, George Orwell, on the right-hand side, his health was failing. He hadn't been very well for a very long time. He had tuberculosis, and his doctors said to him, you need to go somewhere with lovely fresh air to try and let your lungs recover. So he went to the island of Jura, and he found a really remote cottage. And on Jura was where he finished writing his masterpiece, 1984. He finished it in 1948, and I believe he died in 1949. 1948, of course, is reversed, and that's why the year is 1984. But also Orwell recorded in his diary a time that he took himself and his nephew and a couple of other people out in a boat, and they got dangerously close to the Corrie Vrecken whirlpool, and it nearly pulled them in. So we may never have had this book had the Corrie Vrecken whirlpool got him. The one other thing that's the island, that Jura is famous for is they have a wonderful distillery and they make all these fantastic whiskies. Now, I know this is a Girl Scout tour. I know probably most people are adults. I'm not going to really dwell on whiskey, but we're going to come on to the next island, and I can't not talk about whiskey when I talk about the next island. Next thing here, before we move on to the islands, I'm going to show you how important it is. Here are the Scots whiskey regions. So all of these distinct regions of Scots whiskey have different flavours and different tastes. So starting on the right-hand side near the top, Speyside. This is the most famous whiskey region. These are ones that you may in North America be quite familiar with. Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie, Glengrant, Glenfarclas, all of these whiskies. They're very, very light, very, very easy on the palate. Then we have the Highlands here. That's lots and lots of really strong whiskies here. Then you have all the islands. So we've looked at the islands here, the Outer Hebrides, Skye, Mull down here, Kilcoman, all of these ones here, right up to Orkney at the top. Down below, the red one is the lowlands. So you have some whiskey distilleries in Glasgow, where I'm from, and a few more in the south, and a couple in Edinburgh, which is over on the east coast. And then you look at the two tiny little regions. You have Campbelltown at the bottom, at the end of the Mull of Kintyre, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And then you have this beautiful, beautiful blue colour, and this island, Islay. Okay, Islay. Islay is the Queen of the Hebrides. It is known as the Queen of the Hebrides. It is stunningly beautiful. Here is just some of the mountains, but it is most famous for having so many distilleries on them. Count them, guys. There are 10 distilleries on Islay. It's 127 square miles in total. Skye, where we came from earlier, only has one distillery. It's about 10 times the size here. Mull, that we just talked about, is 4 times the size of Islay. It only has 2 distilleries on it. Islay is just incredibly famous for making the most wonderful peated whiskies. There are 8 famous ones: Bunnahabhain, Cailleach, Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Laphroaig, Bowmore, Bruichladdich, and Kilchoman. They're all peaty and smoky flavoured whiskies, and I have been, I can say, to every single one of those distilleries. Also, I'm going to deal with this. The very first tour that I watched in preparation for doing my first one was a wonderful tour of Scotland by one of my colleagues, but he was asked a question, and it was how to pronounce the name of this island, and he got it a bit wrong. That was the only thing he got wrong in the whole thing, because he was absolutely fabulous. But I'm here to absolutely tell you, the way you pronounce this island is Islay. That is the correct pronunciation, Islay. No, nothing else is correct. So it's famous for its distilleries. It's got lots of peat in the ground. It makes smoky, smoky whiskies, and it's absolutely fantastic. There's a couple of others here. You can see at the bottom it says Port Charlotte and it says Port Ellen Maltings. These 8 that I mentioned are whiskies that are bottling. So there's the process. I won't go into the process. Just to say that the Scots whiskey tradition is to mature whiskies twice. So we distill them twice, which leaves still quite a rough tasting whiskey. So it's quite rough on the palate. It's maybe not to the palate of North Americans. You, for the most part, seem to prefer Irish whiskies, and Irish whiskies are distilled 3 times and are smoother. But what we like to say in Scotland is we only have to have 2 goes to make a wonderful whiskey. The Irish have to do it 3 times. So here are the 8 major whiskies of Islay. There are more distilleries than there are bottles, because it takes a minimum of 8 years in a barrel for a beautiful whiskey like this to mature. So there's some other distilleries who are making whiskey, but they are not bottling yet. So there's going to be more. In fact, there's going to be 14 distilleries on Islay as well. So I just wanted to cover that whiskey briefly, but there you are again. Bowmore, Laphroaig, Ardbeg, my own favourite, Lagavulin, Cailleach, Bunnahabhain, Bruichladdich, and Kilchoman are the 8 bottled whiskies from the island of Islay, and it's just fantastic. Couple of the distilleries, they're really beautiful looking. This is Lagavulin. Lagavulin is a Gaelic word which means the mill in the hollow. And then my beautiful Ardbeg, which is here. Ardbeg means rocky promontory. How do you get about these islands? Well, here's something for you. You can have a little look at this. The Hebridean Hopscotch Holiday. You can get 3 islands, 5 islands, or you can hop all the way around. It's a really, really inexpensive way to get around all of these amazing islands that I've been talking about. You can also fly around them. If you remember Barra Airport, you have Loganair as well, which is Scotland's airline, and they fly from all over Scotland to all of the islands. So, excuse me a second. I want to talk about just a few places on the west coast that I think you would be very interested in that are maybe not right on the on your radar. So, right up in the north of Scotland. Now, here's something unusual. Well, maybe a bit funny. The north of Scotland is called Sutherland, which means the southern land. And the reason is because, of course, it was completely covered by Vikings from about the 8th century onwards. And of course, the Vikings were coming from the north and they were coming down into Scotland. So they were coming south. So as far as they were concerned, this was their southern land. So it's Sutherland. And up here in this northern part of Scotland, you have this fantastic road, this red line that goes all the way around, and it's called the North Coast 500. I have driven lots of this, but not all the way around it. And it's amazing. I've been to a lot of the places on here. It's a great driving road. It's great for motorcycles, and it is round about 500 miles and takes you from Inverness, just at the bottom of the picture here, all the way up to John O'Groats and right round. So a couple of places that you might visit on the way is Thurso, which is right on the north coast. Thurso, again, is a fishing town. Beautiful, beautiful granite buildings here. Great place, very, very friendly place, right on the north coast. And just a little bit, I put this photograph in. It's absolutely no reason. While I was making this presentation, my next door neighbours, we were chatting on Messenger, and they said, "Oh, we're in Thurso for this week." I said, "Oh, I'm going to include Thurso. Can you send me a picture?" So this is them out in the hills just above Thurso. Lisa and Steve, no reason they're here other than that they're my lovely neighbours. Right beside Thurso, you have John O'Groats. You may have heard of John O'Groats because it's a famous journey that we do, that some people do. John O'Groats to Land's End. People have walked it, people have cycled it, people have swam round the edge of the country to get there. But John O'Groats is the top of Scotland, and Land's End is the very end of Cornwall, right out into the Western Atlantic, and it's 874 miles. So it's up there as well. Also, I wanted to tell you about this town of Ullapool. And Ullapool is great for a couple of things. It's great for lots of things. It's beautiful, of course. Beautiful fishing fleet as well. But it's great for puffins and fish and chips. The puffins are these little birds. They're beautiful. As I say, I'm up here in Iceland on tour. We're going to go to places tomorrow where we're going to see puffins. And I was really quite amazed to discover that one of my guests didn't know what a puffin was. So they are little seabirds. They live out at sea in the winter. They come into high cliffs in the spring to lay eggs and to have babies and then fly back out as well. But when they're nesting, they look wonderful. They look like a cross between a toucan and a puffin. A toucan and a penguin, my bad. And you can find them off the coast of Ullapool on Handa Island out here as well. And also fish and chips. Whenever I have had a group from North America, even people from Australia, as soon as they get to the UK, they want to have some fish and chips. It's obviously quite famous, but Ullapool, being a fishing fleet, is full of great fish and chips places as well. And then you can get ferries out to the Western Isles and the Outer Hebrides there. So Ullapool is on the west coast, and we're going to come down from there. The next place I'd like to show you is this wonderful little fishing town. It's called Arisaig. Now, Arisaig itself is really beautiful. It has a beach called the Silver Sands, and it's a great place. Lots of Scots people go there on holiday. One particular claim to fame, I was talking about Bonnie Prince Charlie earlier on, and his flight across the Heather. So it lasted for five and a half months, and eventually he was saved and taken away from Scotland on a French frigate. And the French managed to send the frigate just to this little village of Arisaig, where Bonnie Prince Charlie was taken away by the French, never to return to Scotland. He died a drunk, age 60, in Rome many, many years later. So Arisaig was where Bonnie Prince Charlie last set foot on Scottish soil. Just beside Arisaig, you have the port and the fishing town of Mallaig, and this is Mallaig Harbour with all the fishing boats in it. Mallaig is one of the gateways to the Isles and to some really, really specific islands that I want to talk to you just really, really briefly. When you get to Mallaig, you can get to all the Inner and Outer Hebrides, but it also takes you to these little islands here, and they are known as the Small Isles, and they are Egg, Muck and Rum. And I just wanted to talk to you about one island in particular, and that's the island of Egg. I have a friend, he's a very good friend, his name is Johnny Lynch. He's a musician and he goes by the name of the Pictish Trail. This is him here on the Isle of Egg, where he lives, and he runs a record company here called Lost Map Records. It is based on the Isle of Egg. He does folk music and he does electronic music, and it's really amazing. He's standing on a beach here called Howling Beach, and he's in the background is the other small Isle of Rum. So I just wanted to do a little bit of promotion for that. You may be able to see my sweatshirt as well. I'm wearing a Lost Map sweatshirt. I'm representing for Lost Map here tonight. Johnny also, because he's absolutely crazy, every 2 years he has a festival, and that festival is called Howlin' Fling. I used to be a chef, and I used to go up and do all the catering for it, which was pretty crazy. But every second year, last weekend in July, he has a miniature festival. There's only about 350, 400 people that can get onto the island and go to it, but he gets some amazing bands, because really what he does is he offers them holidays on the island, and he offers them food and lodging in return for them playing a gig at his festival. So he has an amazing bands like Hot Chip and Beth Orton and Steve Mason from the Beta Band. I don't know if these names mean anything to you, but I've had amazing times up on here on the Isle of Egg for Lost Maps Howlin' Fling Festival in July. Hopefully it will be able to come back next year. Here is the crew at the end of the last Howlin' Fling. That's them all after a weekend of mayhem, all finished. Johnny is sitting just at the front there with his son Arlo. Yeah, so that's enough of me shilling for my friend's record company, Lost Map Records, but they are amazing. They are based on an island. Who else is going to base a record label on a tiny little Scottish island? Just below that, this is Oban, and Oban is the gateway to the Isles. I have a friend who lives there. Her name is Jill, and I asked her for a photograph. She sent it about 15 minutes before I started tonight. So Jill, hell mend you, you're not going to be in this. Oban, again, as you can see, is a fishing town. Really a beautiful town. Lots of things to do, lots of great. Tourists come there as well. And you may notice just at the top of the picture, there's a very strange structure up the top there. That is McCaig's Tower, or McCaig's Folly, and that's it looking back down on the town of Oban. This was built by a man called John McCaig in the 19th century. He had great plans to make something with it. He maybe wanted to make a hotel out of it, but it never ever got finished. And another piece of architecture that never got finished and has no absolute use, we call a folly. And it's up on the top of Oban here. You can come and visit Oban. You can walk up to it in about 15 minutes. It's really, it's an amazing structure, but it has absolutely no use. Oban as well is, they make whiskey here. They make a wonderful whiskey called Oban, of course. And it is the gateway to the islands, the gateway to the islands. That's where you would get the ferry, particularly to Mull and to southern Skye and right out to Kilcoman. You can also get a ferry that will take you right out to the Outer Hebrides from here as well. It's about 4 hours on the train from Glasgow. When it was announced that I was going to do this talk, somebody got in touch and said, are you going to talk about the Crinan Canal? And initially I thought, I'm probably not going to talk about the Crinan Canal, but as somebody has asked, I guess I better put it in. So the Crinan Canal is a man-made waterway, and it's over here from Crinan to Ardrishig. And it's a way of cutting out this place here underneath the Crinan Canal is the Mull of Kintyre, which is an incredibly long, thin piece of land, which otherwise, if there wasn't a canal here, you would have to sail round and sail back up. This takes a huge amount of time out of your journey. And here's some of the lock systems of the Crinan Canal. It's an amazing piece of man-made engineering. The small boats, the yachts and everything come into these locks and little bays, and then they travel through. You see them traveling through all the locks there as well, and they come out into Loch Fyne. And at the top of Loch Fyne, there's a wonderful little town called Inverary, and that's at the head of Loch Fyne. Loch Fyne is a sea loch. That means it's like it empties out into the sea. So you can see that there's a tide here coming back and forward, and all the beautiful buildings are painted white. Within Inverary, because it was a very important strategical place, particularly during the Jacobite uprising, there is this castle, and this is Inverary Castle, and sitting in front of it is the Duke of Argyll and his family, and they are Clan Campbell. You may remember that from earlier on. So that is the Campbell family, and you may remember that they were the ones who massacred the MacDonalds in the Glencoe massacre. Now, the Campbells have always been loyal to the British Crown, and their castle has always been safe because of it. But the Campbells these days are much, much nicer bunch. And in fact, we go and visit this castle. Excuse me, that's jumped 2 frames there. We go and visit this castle. This is what the interior looks like. This is the entrance hall. And as you can see, it's full of rifles, swords, halberts, and pikes. It's a show of strength from the Clan Campbell as you walk in. It has, oh, I've gone backwards, my bad. It has this amazing state dining room where they entertain dignitaries from all over the world. And it also has these beautiful, beautiful gardens. Excuse me, I'll go one back there. These beautiful gardens. Now, I take people to visit here all the time. And when they finish their visit, they like to go to the cafe, which is in the old kitchens downstairs. And quite often, when you come to visit, particularly at the weekend, the Duke likes to come down and work in the cafe as well. So if you ever come here and you're looking for the Duke and you want to be served by him, you'll be able to spot him because he's a very handsome man, about 6'2" tall, and he wears an apron that says the Duke. So you always know who he is. And it's a wonderful visit to Inverary Castle. The last thing I want to talk about here, and I've teased you with it, so to speak, a couple of times. This is the Mull of Kintyre, this central part in the middle. And you know what? I've been toying with saying this and whether I was going to say it or not, but here we go. The BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, have a rule about nudity, and specifically male nudity, and it's called the Mull of Kintyre Rule. The Mull of Kintyre Rule. And I'm going to leave it entirely at that. And you can ask me if you don't quite get it. At the end of the Mull of Kintyre, you can see Campbelltown here. So it's all still part of Clan Campbell. And that town as well, and that area is a whiskey region all of its own as well. Sorry, I keep pressing the wrong one. If you know Mull of Kintyre at all, you may know it because of this song. This is Paul McCartney and Wings. It's his biggest selling single of all time from 1977. I really like it. It's a really, really catchy song. I don't really like the bagpipes coming in at the end, but I think it's a fabulous song. And if you know the Mull of Kintyre, you probably know this song. This is actually Campbelltown on the Mull of Kintyre. Fabulous, beautiful bay again. It's quite remote. I have a friend called Bruce who comes from here as well. He loves it, but he doesn't live there anymore. Quite a large population down there, but it's very, very remote. You have to either get the ferry to it, which takes a couple of hours, or you have to drive all the way around. When I was a young man, I did that journey with my dad, and it took something like 7 hours to get all the way around. And as I mentioned, it's its own whiskey region. So you have Campbelltown whiskey itself. You have this one here, Glen Scotia, and you also have Springbank and a few other whiskies as well. So it's his own region. And just finally, I wanted to finish with this picture of Paul and Linda McCartney and their family on their farm in the Mull of Kintyre. He loved going there in the 70s because he just loved getting away from everything and being a farmer. And that's where he says he was happiest in the whole of his life. And the reason I wanted to finish with that picture is because I want to start the final section about Glasgow with this picture taken about the same time. This is Paul McCartney coming out of Cameron's pub, which was in the West End of Glasgow, and he's got a bag under his arm. And that bag is what we in Glasgow call a kerry oot. A kerry oot, which is basically some booze bought from the pub to take home. So you've had your Kerry out, you've carried it out of the pub. So here we are. I just love that photograph. Paul McCartney just looks so happy. So here we are, Glasgow, my hometown. Let's go. Glasgow. If you're from Glasgow, you will pronounce it Glasgow. Glasgow. That's how everybody in Glasgow says it. I always tell my guests when they come here that saying it Glasgow is like a shibboleth. It's like a password. It tells people that you're from the city. And the name Glasgow means dear green place. You've seen a lot of green tonight. This is partly why it is. It started out in about the 6th century in the Common Era. It started as 2 fishing villages, one at the top of the hill where the cathedral was eventually built, and one at the bottom of the hill where the fishing village was on the River Clyde. Today, Glasgow has a population of 625,000. It's a modern multicultural city and it's post-industrial, and I'll talk about all of that. When I say Glasgow has a population of 625,000, that's Greater Glasgow. I'll show you the outline of Greater Glasgow there. And with the arrow there to where I live in Glasgow, which is Govan Hill. So that's Greater Glasgow and all its regions. And then all around it, there's lots and lots of satellite towns. And when you add them in, all around the region, there's about 3.2 million people in the whole area. But that's the city, that's the area I come from. And these are some of my homies. These are my homies. I'm from Glasgow. We are called Glaswegians or Ouijies. And that's me in my best Lost Map hat. Represent, guys. Represent with some members of NWA who I believe also come from Glasgow. I arrived in Iceland the other day, and the guy on the border said hello, and he said, "Oh, you're Scottish." I lived in Scotland for a while as well, and it turned out he'd lived in Glasgow. And I went swimming last night in Reykjavik, and the girl immediately said, "You've got a Scottish accent. Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Glasgow." And she said, "You're a Ouijie." So it was like people in Iceland even know that Glaswegians are called Ouijies. Glasgow was famous, or Glasgow was an industrial city right up until the end of the 20th century. It was most famous for shipbuilding. We had huge shipbuilding yards all along the Clyde. And at one point in the late 1930s and early 40s, Glasgow was responsible for 25% of all the shipping made in the whole world. Before that, it was also a shipping area because it moved a lot of cargo. In the 17th, 18th, and early 19th century, it was involved in this, which is the triangular trade, which meant that it took sugar and tobacco from North America and cotton, took it over to Europe, refilled its boats, put textiles, rum, and manufactured goods, took them to Africa, and then took slaves from Africa to North America. Now, a dark time, slavery is a terrible thing. Scotland is now really, really owning up to its involvement in this triangular trade, and we are dealing with it. We're going to actually have a slavery museum just outside Glasgow as well. So that was it. And in Glasgow in the 18th century, when it first started to get very rich, the first really rich men in the area were called the tobacco barons because they made their money with tobacco. Here is a little representation of slavery within Glasgow as well, and some of the remnants. So we have Virginia Street in Glasgow, we have Jamaica Street, and we have the Tobacco Exchange, which is in the Merchant City. So as I say, we're owning up to this dark past. You know, we had slaves, and in fact, Scotland had more slaves per capita than anywhere else in the UK. So, you know, a dark time. Glaswegians, we are the Glaswegians, are very, very friendly. They're really friendly. Come to our city. You may think our city has a reputation for razor gangs and fighting. Not anymore. We are the friendliest city in the United Kingdom. On the left-hand side, that photograph is George Square in the centre of the city, and that's everybody celebrating New Year's Eve, or as we call it in Scotland, Hogmanay. Hogmanay. And down at the bottom, that's everybody in Glasgow celebrating our 2 losses and 1 draw in the recent European Football Championships. don't let the results get in the way of a good party. We really love a party. We're very, very friendly. You should absolutely come and visit, particularly if you want to buy us a drink. This is one of the oldest pubs in Scotland. It's called the Scotia Bar. It's right down beside Clydeside, and it's very, very famous for folk music. In fact, maybe you know Scotland's greatest export, Billy Connolly, the comedian and folk musician. Billy, anytime he comes back to Glasgow, always ends up in the Scotia Bar playing his banjo or singing along. But we're very, very happy if you buy us a drink. Here is an interesting fact about Scotland. We are one of the only countries in the world where our local soft drink, which is from Glasgow, outsells Coca-Cola. And our local soft drink is called Iron Brew, and it's made by a company called Bars. I put the bottle in on the left-hand side. That's the traditional glass bottle. And then you've got the traditional can with the Bars Strongman as well. The hook line, or the sort of strap line for the drink, is it's made in Scotland from girders. So we say it's made out of iron, and it's very, very good for you. In Scotland, we particularly love it because we use it as a hangover cure. So if we're feeling a bit down from the night before, a good swally of iron brew, full of sugar, full of fizz, tends to perk us up. So we are one of the only countries in the world where our local soft drink, Bars Iron Brew, outsells Coca-Cola. We have a huge football rivalry. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm safe in saying it's the biggest in the world. It's a very, very divisive rivalry because it's across two religions. So if you look in the top, one team play in green, white and gold and celebrate the Irish flag, Catholicism, and the other team plays in red, white and blue down at the bottom. They celebrate the Union and Protestantism. It's very divisive, and we have these two teams in the city. Now, I've not told you the names of the teams because it is quite divisive. It's a really, really, it's people love the teams, but they have such a fierce, fierce rivalry that it can spill out over into violence. So I want to remain very, very neutral here and just tell you the two football teams that are major ones in Glasgow. So the first football team that play in the red, white and blue is this team, and they're called Glasgow Rangers. They play in the west side of the city, south of the river. And then we have the second team. And again, I'm trying to remain completely neutral here. The second team are called the mighty, mighty Glasgow Celtic Football Club. They play in green, white and gold. You might have noticed the background all the way through, guys. Trying to remain neutral, green top. They are the Catholic team. They play in the east end of the city, and up until this year, they have been dominating the Scottish game. So the two teams, they have huge rivalries. They've been rivals for over 130 years now, and they are the two dominant forces in the city. When you talk about pubs in Glasgow, they're either a Rangers pub or a Celtic pub. So you need to kind of know it's a weird mindset as well. So let's talk about religion, shall we? So Scotland, as I said at the beginning of the talk, is Protestant Presbyterian mostly, but we have all the religions. And this is our cathedral, except it's not a cathedral. It was a cathedral up until the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, but now it is a Church of Scotland Protestant church and is called the High Kirk of St Kentigern. St Kentigern is the patron saint of Glasgow, and he's also known as St Mungo. The thing is, us Glaswegians, we are thrifty. So when we saw this church, we thought, well, we could pull it down and make a Protestant one, or we could just repurpose it. So we repurposed the church, and it became our High Kirk of St Kentigern, or High Kirk of Glasgow. And it's still here. So some of this building dates back to about the 14th century, right through to the 15th century when it was completed. And you can see the roof here that's made out of copper, and it's oxidized, and it's become verdigris. We also have a Catholic congregation. I should say about of people who identify as religious in Scotland, it's about 55% Protestant, 23% Catholic, but that population is growing. And the reason it is growing because we have lots and lots of Poles and Czechs who have come across from Central Europe and are now making a home in Scotland. They're Catholics and they're growing the Catholic religion within Scotland once more. So this is St Andrew's Roman Catholic Cathedral. It's on the Clyde side, right beside the river. And it's quite a small cathedral, but it is the Cathedral of Glasgow. Just to say, we have all different religions here in Glasgow as well. This is the Sikh Gurdwara. It's one of two Sikh Gurdwaras, one on the south side and one on the north side of the river. This one here is about 10 minutes away from my house. I went out for a walk one morning to take loads of pictures of the churches and religious places in my area of Govan Hill. So I went out to see this. This is brand new and it's got a big, big congregation. Excuse me a second. So the Sikh Gurdwara. We also have the Glasgow Central Mosque, which is, again, it's about 20 minutes walk from my house. This is a stock picture of them. But we have quite a large Muslim population in Scotland as well. In Glasgow, it's about 4 or 5% Muslim. We have this purpose-built mosque here, another one in the north of the city, and actually just at the end of my street in Govan Hill, we have an old church which has been repurposed into a mosque because there's quite a big Muslim population in the area as well. Also, we have a big Jewish population. A lot of Jewish people, first of all, fled the pogroms at the start of, or the end of the 19th, start of the 20th century, and they moved to Glasgow. Now, I'm going to show you the old Glasgow synagogue in a minute, but this is the new Glasgow synagogue, and it's in an area called Giffnock. When the original Jewish population really came to Glasgow, Scotland, round about the end of the 19th, early 20th century, they came to the area that I live in, Govan Hill. It was always an area of migration, and they actually started their own synagogue there. So up in the top right-hand corner, you can see the old synagogue, which is still in Govan Hill, but it's no longer populated because if you're Jewish or if you know anything about the faith, the people pay for the rabbi and they pay for the upkeep of the synagogue. And when everybody moved out of Govan Hill, round about the early 50s, they moved over to Giffnock, which is a much more leafy, much more suburban area. They funded their own new synagogue, and that was the one that I showed you earlier. So the old one is now sitting empty. Somebody wants to turn it into apartments. Everybody else is fighting, saying, no, it needs to be preserved as a piece of history within the community. Starting then on the left-hand side, this is the church at the end of my street. It's now a mosque. It's the Al Farouk Dixon Mosque. I live in Dixon Avenue, if you're ever looking for me. Right next door to it, this is a Baptist church. Next door to this one with the yellow front, that is the Church of Scotland Presbyterian Church. And next to that again, that is the Holy Cross Church on Dixon Avenue. That's directly across from my house, and I hear the bell going twice a day, and it's a lovely, lovely sound. So we have loads and loads of different religions within Glasgow. But here you are. Glasgow, as a city, we do not take any BS, and we do not like authority. So the police here, this dangerous looking policeman, this is me dressed up as a policeman for a TV programme that I was an extra in. Glaswegians do not take well to authority, and let me give you a few examples of this. We're socialist. We are socialist. We are borderline communist at times as well in Glasgow. Early part of the 20th century, we were virtually communist. I'll explain about that in a minute. We have always been to the left politically. We are one of the 4 regions that actually did vote very, very overwhelmingly for independence, whereas the rest of the country decided against it. Fair enough. But we have always been socialist. We look after each other, where we look after our own. You see that as we go. Authority. We have no time for authority. This is a statue of the Duke of Wellington in Queen Street in Glasgow. The Duke of Wellington is the man who basically beat Napoleon in the 19th century, won us the Napoleonic Wars, defeated him, went on to become Prime Minister. He is a great war hero. He's a great political hero in Scotland and all over the United Kingdom. And to be honest, we put this statue up of him. Now, I'm just going to tell you this now. I have never, ever, ever in my life seen this statue look like this. The statue always looks like this. It always looks some version of this. This is the Duke of Wellington statue, and every time I've ever seen it, some Glaswegian, either drunk or sober, has shimmied up the side of its plinth, got onto the back of that horse, and put a road cone on the Duke and also onto his horse, Copenhagen. You can see it here on the right-hand side as well. That's a pile of cones there. The plinth as well, you can see it here. That is a heck of a lot of road cones on there. This is what we do to authority in Glasgow. The plinth is about 10 feet high. And a few years ago, Glasgow City Council said that they were going to raise the plinth to stop people getting able to get up on there and put the road cones on. People of Glasgow got a petition together and insisted that the council didn't do that. So nowadays, you always see road cones on the Duke of Wellington whenever you come to the city. Another example of our civil disobedience was during the First World War. All the men were away fighting, all the women were working, looking after children and living in rented accommodation, and the landlords tried to put the money up that they were paying. This woman on the left, Mary Barber, organised all the women of Glasgow and created a huge rent strike where the women refused to work, refused to pay their rent, and eventually the landlords had to back down. The government stepped in and stopped it. So civil disobedience in Glasgow tends to work. This is the most famous piece of early 20th century civil disobedience in Glasgow. This is the 40-hour-a-week pay strike. And on the left-hand side, this is crowds of people in George Square in Glasgow protesting on the night of the 29th of January 1919. On the 30th of January, the British government were so scared about the level of communism and socialism going on in Glasgow that they actually sent in the army and they sent in tanks and machine gun carriers. They sent in the army to disperse people. Few people were killed. They actually withheld Scottish battalions because they thought the Scottish battalions would actually side with the strikers. That picture on the left-hand side, there is roughly 30,000 people in George Square protesting the week. They were currently working a 55-hour week and they were striking for a 40-hour week. In saying it, they got it. Their leaders were put in prison, given hard labour. Lots of people were locked up, but we got the 40-hour week. And the person who sent in those tanks and machine guns used it on his own people, Winston Churchill, the great war hero. So he's a very, very divisive figure in Scotland. Another thing to talk about, in the 1980s, you may have heard of the freedom fighter, terrorist Nelson Mandela. He was arrested, tried, and put in prison in South Africa in the 1960s. But in the 1970s and 1980s, this group of guys in the bottom campaigned to keep his cause alive. And in Glasgow, we took that to heart and we protested the British government and the apartheid system, and we protested and protested, and eventually Glasgow City Council, being a contrary old council, sided with us, sided with the people of Glasgow. And you can see these guys in the bottom. Glasgow City Council has just agreed that this square behind these guys is going to be called Nelson Mandela Place. This was 1983, and the reason this square was picked was because that was where the South African embassy was. So the address for the South African embassy in 1983 in Glasgow was going to become Nelson Mandela Place, the name of their public enemy number one. And in fact, round about the same time, Glasgow gave Nelson Mandela the freedom of the city. And when Nelson Mandela was finally released in 1990, he came to Scotland and he visited us here. That's him on the left, that black and white photograph. Again, George Square in the background. He came and he thanked the people of Glasgow and the people of Scotland for fighting for him. In the top photograph there as well, that's the Lord Provost of Glasgow welcoming Nelson Mandela in. He came here for like a civic reception, and he received the keys and the free man of the city. So as you can see, we have no time for authority. And I wanted to show you this one last thing. This happened in Glasgow 2 months ago, and I was kind of tangentially involved with this. This has become known as the Battle of Kenmure Street. Now, the UK government, not the Scottish government, are in control of immigration in this country. So the Home Office, which is part of the British government, sent an immigration enforcement van to Kenmure Street, which is about 5 minutes walk away from where I live. They were going to take away some local men who'd lived in the area for 12 years, but who the Home Office had decided were not actual British nationals. People spotted the van coming in, and they got in touch with people who are involved with stopping this kind of thing. And the advice was, get yourself near the van, get yourself under the van, make it unable to move. You can see these guys in the top right-hand corner. People put themselves in harm's way all day. They sat under that van, around it, around the wheels, peacefully protest. They would not let the van move. And eventually, the Home Office had to back down and release the men. You can see them in the bottom right-hand corner. These are men who are of Pakistani origin, but have been living in this country for years. And the Home Office just decided that they were going to deport them. The people of Glasgow are not taking that. They may have come from Pakistan, but they're Weegies now. They live in Weegistan now. And that's what we look after. So you can see the Glaswegian people do not put up with authority and do not take things lying down. That is hundreds and hundreds of people blocking a whole street. Local restaurants made food for the people protesting. They brought them all round. People brought water and drinks for everybody, and they kept them going all day. It was an incredibly busy, hot day in May. And I can't say I was particularly involved. I was there on the periphery seeing what was going on, but it was quite an amazing, amazing day and quite a victory for the people of Glasgow. So that's what I wanted to talk about our lack of authority. On the other hand, here is this. Glasgow people are great people at heart. Our new slogan is called People Make Glasgow. Our old slogan is Let Glasgow Flourish, and there is the emblem of Glasgow. The 4 symbols of Glasgow are a tree, a bird, a fish, and a bell, and there you have St Kentigern up in the top. Here are a few more examples of the emblems of Glasgow. On the left-hand side, this light, the tree, the bird, the fish, and the bell, is outside Glasgow Cathedral. On the right-hand side, these are the wrought iron bins outside Kelvingrove Museum. I'm going to show you that next. And right above the door, this here is the tree, the bird, the fish, and the bell, and the St Andrew's cross, which is right above St Andrew's Cathedral. You might have spotted it in the photograph earlier on. So these are the symbols of my city. And as I said, I was going to show you Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum. And this is the statue of St Kentigern right outside it. He's also known as St Mungo. St Mungo means the dear one. Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum is a fabulous place in the West End. If you come to Glasgow, you have to visit it. It's built, this is the back entrance to it. This is not the front. The front has St Mungo on it. It's full of amazing artifacts. There's just one of the galleries, the gallery here with a Spitfire Mark 20 hanging up, and all the natural history in it as well. It has several galleries that all look like this. And the most famous thing, the most famous acquisition we have in here is this painting. Christ of St. John of the Cross by Salvador Dali, painted in the late 1940s, acquired by Glasgow City Council in 1951. They were very smart. They also own the image rights. So they have like everything from postcards to tea towels to t-shirts and everything with this image on it. People come from all over the world to see this painting, and it's in Kelvin Grove Museum and Art Galleries. Across from Kelvin Grove Museum and Art Galleries is the University of Glasgow. This is the 1860 building, but the university was founded in 1451. It is the fourth oldest English-speaking university in the world. It goes Oxford, Cambridge, St Andrews, Glasgow. And it's been a great seat of learning ever since. It's my alma mater. It's where I went to university. The cloisters within the university are amazing. Any Harry Potter fans, you may recognise this. This was used in one of the films as part of Hogwarts, but it's this beautiful, beautiful kind of like cloister here. It was designed to look church-like, but it's a church of science and modernism, the new university building. The other really famous building, which I was involved with as well, is this one. This is the Glasgow School of Art, designed by the great Scottish architect, Charles Rennie Mackintosh. It was built in 1899, which is the left-hand side and the gatehouse. And then in 1909, it was expanded into the right-hand side, the four windows, which is why it's not symmetrical and such an amazing building. Here's what it looked like. Oh, sorry, here's Charles Rennie Mackintosh. This is one of the murals in Glasgow, and here's the artist who made the mural. His name is Rogue Wunner. This is called the Toshi mural because Charles Rennie Mackintosh was known by all his friends as Toshi. This stands just down by the River Clyde in the city. This is what the art school looked like. On the left-hand side, you have the amazing library up at the top and the loggia underneath. You see some of the pictures there, but unfortunately in the last few years, 2014 and then again in 2018, the Glasgow School of Art has burned down, and absolutely spectacularly. I should say, before I was a guide, I was a chef, and I owned a company that ran all the catering for the Glasgow School of Art. It wasn't me. I didn't burn it down. We were in a completely different building, but the art school is amazing. It has some amazing alumni. It's you may have heard of the Turner Prize. A lot of Glasgow School of Art students and alumni have won it. There's lots of galleries in Glasgow as well. Here are just a few of them in the east end of the city. Street Level Photography Gallery, the Print Studio, Transmission, and the Centre for Contemporary Arts. Really, Glasgow is full of art. There's a book by a friend of mine called Sarah Lowndes. It's called The Glasgow Miracle, and it's all about the resurgence of art in Glasgow and the modern art and how all of these artists are winning stuff. One of the best artists that I really, really enjoy is this guy on the left. His name is David Shrigley. His art always has a little bit of humour in it. He's standing there on the left-hand side in Trafalgar Square by the fourth plinth, which is an empty plinth, which the government often populate with lots and lots of different pieces of work. His work there, which was called A Big Thumbs Up, was there for 6 months. And on the right-hand side, you can see the football mascot that he designed for Glasgow's third football team, Partick Thistle. This guy here, really, really strange looking guy, is called Kingsley, and the fans of Partick Thistle absolutely love him. So that's David Shrigley. Couple of last things. Glasgow is a huge music city, and so much so that it is actually a UNESCO city of music. The UNESCO people, the story goes that they came to Glasgow because they were blown off course on their way to Amsterdam. They couldn't get in because of really high winds. They had to spend 2 days in Glasgow, and when they went round Glasgow, they realised that everywhere they went, no matter where it was, every night of the week, there was loads and loads of live music on. That's gone at the moment because of COVID, but it's coming back. And our most famous venue is this guy here, the Barrowland Ballroom. You can see it at the bottom, absolutely full of people. It's an old ballroom. It has a sprung floor. The acoustics are amazing. When you get 2,500 people in there, the atmosphere is electric, and we love to party. We love a good time. The other famous venue here in Glasgow is King Tut's Wawa Hut. You may have heard it, you may not have heard it, but you may have heard of this band here. This is Oasis, one of the biggest bands of the 90s and the 2000s out of Manchester. They were discovered in that little club, which holds about 180 people, by their initial label boss, Alan McGee, and it's gone down in legend that this is where this amazing, huge, massive band were discovered in Glasgow in a tiny club called King Tut's Wawa Hut. One last thing, over the last few weeks, just before I was leaving Glasgow, Glasgow has been turned into New York in the 1950s because they're filming the latest Indiana Jones film here. So you can see everybody working, turning these buildings in Glasgow. Glasgow's built on a grid shape as well, very much like New York, and they're filming Indiana Jones here. You can see, I think that's a Harrison Ford stunt double up in the corner. You've got the pipes and drums, and you can see all the yellow lights covering the whole of the city, and there seems to be an astronaut theme there as well. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, yes, there we are. That is me. I'm at the end. That's me by with. You'll be having your tea. Nighty night. I hope that wasn't too long for everyone.
That was awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Austin. So as we transition into the Q&A, I will just say that, you know, we have a lot of people that were wowed by the rugged beauty of the West and the islands, and then to come in and learn about the cities and their culture and their community was just awesome. So thank you very much for sharing those. Right now on the screen, I'm just sharing a way for you all to tip if you are so inclined. And also on the right-hand side, I'm sharing my upcoming tours. If you're interested in joining our group, you can certainly email me. I think my email address is on there as well, marawalsh@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, or if you have, if you need any information at all. We're going to go into our Q&A at this time, and I have sort of brought the questions together in a way that have compartmentalized them a little bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if everybody has gotten the information that they need to off of this, so that you can see both Austin and me a little bit better. And let's just jump into some of the questions. So one of the themes of many of the questions that we have is around the weather. And that's a funny question about Scotland, especially Western and Northern Scotland. But it seemed like a lot of your pictures were crystal clear and beautiful. Let's really talk about the weather in terms of what you can expect, but also how does it relate to tourism? When are popular times to go with regard to the weather? And also when you think about the weather, you have to think about those midges too, and when do they affect people the most? So can you just round out that discussion a little bit?
Yeah, so I obviously like to start by saying, when the truth becomes legend, print the legend. So yes, when is good times to go? Well, okay, yes. So again, I think the places that I'm attracted to, like Iceland and things like that, I'm attracted to because the weather doesn't factor into them. So that's why I probably didn't think about the weather really in Scotland, because I live it every day. But for people who are visiting, nobody comes to Scotland for the weather. The weather can be really good or it can be really bad. I've just left Scotland there. We've had 3 weeks of absolutely amazing, amazing heat, but we're probably going to suffer for it now. So again, high summer can be lovely, but as Mara says, there can be midges everywhere. So in the West Highlands of Scotland, the summer is not the most perfect time to come. It's also when loads of people come anyway, and it's very, very busy. So I always suggest to people that a better time to come is round about April, May, earlier on in the year. That's when the midges are all sleeping and incubating, and before they start to come out, and then they start to die off round about September, and you get the most amazing leaf displays all over Scotland, because you get everything turning golden and red and, you know, dark brown. So come in the summer if you want, but it's when everybody does try to come, and it's very, very, very busy, can be very hot. You have to factor in as well, if you're staying in Scottish hotels, we don't really have air conditioning, because we may get 2 or 3 weeks of really good weather right in the middle of summer. But apart from that, it's freezing cold, or it's dark, or it's dreich, to use a Scottish word, which means dark and wet. So a great time to come, April, May. And again, round about September. Don't come in August. August is crazy. And don't go to Edinburgh in August. It's absolutely crazy. I know you all will, because it's the tattoo, it's the festival and all that. But come earlier in the year, come a little bit later in the year. You won't get as much fluctuations in the weather, but it will be a wonderful time to come. It's not quite as busy. It's not quite as hot. You don't have to worry about the air conditioning. And you won't have to worry as much about the midges. So you get some, we quite often get what we refer to as an Indian summer in September, where you start to get really, really nice weather again, and you get sunny for a time. Honestly, I've been trying for the last 3 weeks, when it was really sunny there, to get a tan, and I'm still looking at my peely wally face here in the screen, and it's just, I'm just a little bit red, and that's about it. But also, another time to come, an amazing time to come, is to come to Scotland at New Year. We do New Year like no other place. We invented New Year. I'm going to claim it. We invented New Year. You can have such an amazing time here. There's huge celebrations in Edinburgh. There's huge celebrations in Glasgow. But even if you just end up at a party on Hogmanay, which is what we call New Year's Eve, Hogmanay, it's cold and it's dark, but the people are warm and friendly and will clasp you to their bosom. So that's my recommendations.
That's good. So I'm going to follow up with the dark and wet and cold. And let's talk about the water. You showed some wonderful water pictures. Do people swim in the water? Is it temperature palatable for swimming? How does that work out?
Yes. So some of the places that I showed you, particularly the Outer Hebrides, they benefit from the Gulf Stream, which is obviously that warm wind and that warm water that comes right up from the Caribbean and the Mexican Gulf, comes all the way up through the North Atlantic. So the water there can be quite a good temperature, and people do tend to swim in it. Also, off the west coast and off the Outer Hebrides, you get amazing waves. So there's a lot of surfing goes on there as well. But as you come down and you come closer to the mainland and you're away from the Gulf Stream, it does get cold. However, that doesn't put people off. You have people out in wetsuits and dry suits all the time swimming. I have so many friends. I'm not a great fan of it, because I'm of an age that saw Jaws when we were in our sort of like, you know, my early teens, and I've been terrified of open water ever since. But I have loads and loads of friends who love to just put on a wetsuit and go swimming in the sea. It is cold, but it's invigorating and you get used to it. And sometimes when people ask me on tour they say, oh, how cold is the water? I tend to say to them, oh, it's probably about that cold. If that makes sense. I'm looking there. Billy Connolly starred in a movie in the west coast of Scotland. I wonder what that one. Oh, I think I know what that one was. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. But yes, up in the Outer Hebrides, there's amazing surfing. The water is reasonably warm. But when you come into the Inner Hebrides...
Yeah, when you say reasonably warm, I think you need to explain that to the world. It's reasonably warm for northern Scotland. It is not reasonably warm for most people.
No, I guess not. I guess it's not Pacific warm. It's probably not Gulf of Mexico warm, but it's a
3 mil wetsuit warm.
I know nothing about wetsuits, but that sounds about right. That's you know, as I refer you to my previous comments about Jaws. I've never
Right.
been in a wetsuit in my life, so yes.
Exactly.
So it's a
Okay, so
female wetsuit.
let's talk about Glasgow a little bit. I think there was a bit of alarm when you talked about the passion that the people have and how they avoid, you know, they sort of scurry themselves away from following the rules. And so that leads me to a couple questions. One, how does that present itself in the town of being that rebellious? Is it known for that? And do you have problems that mount from that? And then two, has it affected the whole COVID protocols and also the vaccination rates? So is that something that that area of Scotland is rebellious against as well?
No, absolutely not. No, we are. We want to get back to normal, and pretty much everyone is taking their is getting the vaccine. Our rebellious nature is pointed more towards authority, so like governments. So not the NHS, the National Health Service, which we're all incredibly proud of. We have our own NHS in Scotland, which is separate to the United Kingdom, and it is controlled by the separate Scottish government. So we have a Scottish government, we have a UK government, and the Scottish government is involved with a lot of things, and it controls the NHS. Scots people, including Glaswegians, are incredibly proud of that. Thousands of us work in that. I say us, my wife works in the NHS. Our rebellious nature is a little bit more, let me think. There's a lot of
the origin of it, do you think? What is the origin of that rebellion?
The origin is kind of feeling like we don't count within the United Kingdom, and being a little bit of a testing ground. To give you an idea, in the 1980s, the Conservative government introduced a new tax called the poll tax. Now, to put that into context, within the United Kingdom, Scotland never, ever, ever votes for a Conservative government, but we get it anyway because England is so much bigger. Okay, so England has so much more people in it that we end up, because they vote for Conservative governments, we end up being under the rule or under the thumb of a Conservative government. That Conservative government decided that it was going to use Glasgow, Scotland, in fact, the whole of Scotland, as a testing ground for this new tax that they wanted to bring in, which was incredibly unpopular. Now, Scotland spent the whole of 1989 peacefully protesting that. Okay, particularly in Glasgow, we peacefully protested it. We protested it with a lot of humour. We protested it with a lot of like affirmative action around people. We didn't get anywhere because it was a Conservative government and it was propped up by England. But they started that tax the next year in England. And when England started to protest it, they protested it incredibly violently. They had running battles in London. They had running battles in Manchester. There was an incredible amount of violence. So to give you an idea, Scotland is a rebellious country, but we're not a violently rebellious country. We are a peaceful, rebellious country that want to
be heard.
Our point.
To be heard.
We want to be heard. So, like, even when I'm saying there, Mary Barber's fight against the rent and all the women, no violence.
Mm-hmm.
The working week strike, the Scots people in George Square didn't start the violence. The British government started the violence and killed people. We did not fight. We protested. We protested peacefully in it. So we don't protest violently. We don't get into fights about things, but we protest. There's a lot of humor in it. There's a lot of kind of, interest there.
Back to the traffic cones on the Wellington statue,
basically,
right? Yeah. Let's lighten it up a little bit if we can. Let's get into things like food.
Yes.
Fish, what types of fish are in the fish and chips? Talk to us about your food. Is it different from the rest of Scotland? What are the, I mean, I know the typical fish and chips. What are we talking about? Are those, what fish are being gleaned, and what are the foods that you just die for in your region?
Okay, so Glasgow has a very, very bad diet on some levels. The fish that's predominantly in our fish and chips is haddock. We mostly have haddock. When you go to England, you usually go to a place that's like, they have like, say, salmon and chips, cod and chips, rock and chips, all this things. We predominantly have haddock or maybe cod and chips. That is like the absolute standard, the bog standard favorite. As I say, we have quite a sort of like the joke in Glasgow is that we will eat anything as long as it's deep fried. Like, you know, so people may actually be aware that, of a Glasgow delicacy called the deep fried Mars bar.
Yeah, actually.
Now, is a Mars bar the same in North America, or is it got a different?
Yes, we don't call it that, but it's essentially a kind of a Milky Way Snickers kind of thing of that nature.
Yeah, so
not
so
exactly either, but it's similar.
The joke in Glasgow is that we will deep fry anything. The first time I ever had a pizza when I was 7 years old, it was a frozen pizza covered in batter and deep fried. Didn't know any better.
There you go. Let's talk about the Scottish plaids. What was the origin of the plaids? How did it come about? And then how did, give us a little bit of history about that. I mean, I think we understand how it represents different clans and everything, but go back to the beginning. How does this even come about in terms of?
Okay, so the plaid was originally just a woven piece of material. It was a big, long piece of material, probably about, say, 5 or 6 yards long, so like 15, 16 meters long. And what it would just be a piece of woven cloth, probably quite rough woven, sort of cross and back, and woven from wool. And it would have a pattern in it of some sort, and it would have been made with natural dyes from the particular area where the person came from. So the original colors would just have been, say you lived in an area where there was lots of, say, rapeseed, which I think in North America is called canola.
Canola, yeah, canola oil.
Yeah. So you have that very yellow flour that gets used in some of the wool, and that goes into a pattern. So you maybe get yellow, and then there's a lot of like maybe sort of green. These go into original patterns, and they're just woven into a long sheet of material. And what would happen is a man would lie that sheet on the ground, big long sheet of that, and roll himself up into it and make a kind of a tunic with a cover that comes over the top. And that would be the original plaids. And how they've developed over the centuries is they become more and more sophisticated, and all of the clans of Scotland have their own tartans. I have a completely different presentation all about tartan, actually.
That'll be for next time.
Yeah, next time. So maybe we'll do a whole thing on tartans the next time. But after you.
Oh, I was just going to say, let's get more familiar about those two large cities that we talked about in Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow. How far is one from the other?
So they're about 45 miles apart. You can take a train between one and the other in 50 minutes. Mm-hmm. So we're both in the central belt. Glasgow's in the west, Edinburgh's in the east.
And then you mentioned the flights to the outer islands. Is that the only way people get to the outer islands? Or are you taking ferries? Are you taking small boats? What are you doing in terms of your island access?
Mostly people take ferries, but there are flights as well. So there's flights from Glasgow Airport, there's flights from Edinburgh Airport. They're small, like single or twin engine planes. They take about 45 minutes to get up to maybe Skye or something like that. To give you a wee fun example, the very first time that I went to the island of Islay, there was executives from some of the whiskey companies coming in, and they were flying in from Glasgow on little single engine planes, and they had to leave a day early because there was a huge storm coming in. So they had to go back a day early because of this like little plane. But my group had all come. We'd gone up to a place called Craig on the Mull of Kintyre, and we'd taken a ferry down to Isla instead. So most people are taking ferries, but there are aeroplanes if you've got the dollar to do it.
Sure. North Americans consider folks from the United Kingdom to be not as progressed in terms of the anti-smoking era. And we understand, or at least think, that there's still a lot of smoking going on in your region. Are the restaurants smoke-free? Do you see, is it now turned over completely? Are the pubs smoke-free? Where do you still see that going on?
You cannot smoke in any enclosed space except your own home in the United Kingdom. Restaurants are smoke-free, pubs are smoke-free, and they have been since around about 2005. So it's been quite a while now. You're not allowed to smoke indoors anywhere in the United Kingdom at all.
So I have a couple. Sorry, I have a couple.
No, please, no, carry on.
Yep, I have a couple questions that came out of our last conversation about the access to the islands. You put up a slide about a couple tour packages, and you actually showed the quotes. Were they ferry packages or flying packages?
They were ferry packages.
Okay, so I misunderstood that. I thought they were flying packages. They're ferry packages.
Yeah.
And then the other conversation with that is with Inverness. Is Inverness, that's accessible by land, correct? So you're going by train or by car to Inverness usually from Edinburgh. Well, it's kind of a triangle, right? So from Edinburgh or from Glasgow, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a little bit longer from Edinburgh because of the way the roads are, but it takes about 4 hours from Glasgow by car. Same by train, basically. It's a beautiful train journey. You go right up over the high moors of Scotland. You pass a lot of distilleries as well. And from Edinburgh, you kind of come to the other side and you hit the town of Stirling, the city of Stirling, and you go north from there on the same road as you would from Glasgow. So about 4.5 to 5 hours from Edinburgh.
Jumping back to the islands and the ferries that go over, if you're going by car ferry, is that something you need reservations for, or is it something that you just queue up and go on?
So big ferries that say like that go to like the Isle of Mull or to Skye, things like that, you usually need a reservation. But the small ferries, which could be like out to the I just see another question that just popped up. Just going to really deal with it straight away. I just mentioned that on the train journey, you pass a distillery. You literally go past
it. You go buy it. You go buy it.
You pass it. You go buy a whiskey distillery. So sorry, I just saw that up. It was like a broken tooth. I couldn't leave it alone. So the travel to Inverness is pretty straightforward, but the ferries, the bigger ferries, you're best to make a reservation. You can turn up and you may get on, but a lot of the small ones that are just going back and forward, you can just turn up and wait for them. There's ferries all over Scotland.
On those smaller islands like Egg and Skye and Isla, are you talking about B&Bs or are you talking about hotels? What kind of accommodations are on those islands?
There's all types of accommodations. So yes, there's lots and lots of B&Bs, guest houses, hotels as well. They don't do it anymore, but up until about 20 years ago on Skye, because they didn't have enough accommodation for people when they came over, you could actually book a cell in the local police station. If it wasn't
really, that's very interesting.
Yeah, you could book.
Do they pay you to stay in it, or do you have to provide bond?
You pay them to stay in it. So the cells weren't getting used, and in the middle of summer, if there was nobody in the cells, you could actually book out one of those cells for.
There's a fun fact for you.
Yeah, so they don't do it anymore, but there's a lot more. But like Skye has lots of hotels, lots of B&Bs, and of course with the advent of Airbnb as well, you get places all over so you can get rooms in people's houses. So people are renting out all the time. Loads of hotels all the way down. Like say something tiny like Egg, it has B&Bs, but it doesn't have a hotel.
Yeah.
But if you're going on to Mull, like, you know, they have no end of lovely smallish hotels. You know, you're not going to get
Sure.
anything super
Boutique,
fancy.
privately owned
Boutique,
hotels.
yes,
Mhm.
boutique privately owned hotels, that kind of
Yep.
thing is what you get.
And I'll just answer this question, and Austin, you can expand on it. But in general, the world, including Scotland, Western Scotland, and the islands, handle food particularities very well. So if you're vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, you can find food. So that's not an issue really anywhere in the world right now. You can travel as long as, you know, and obviously the people in Scotland speak our language if you're speaking English, so you can speak it. But if you're going to a country that doesn't speak English, write it down clearly, type it out on a card. And if you know where you're going, put a translation in there, do Google Translate, and put it on a card and bring that card with you everywhere you go and put it on the table when you want to order. That way it's extremely clear to all the servers what your food restrictions are. I just thought that would be a good tidbit to put out there for lots of folks who we always get that question. So that's a good question, but it has a really simple, good answer. Let's see, what did I leave untouched here?
Can I just pop in just one quick thing about that, expand on it? The best place in the whole of the United Kingdom for vegan, vegetarian food and catering for allergies and everything is Brighton on the south coast of England. The second best place is Glasgow. Glasgow has loads and loads of vegan restaurants, many people that you know, like fully understand it. We have a huge student population, we have a huge international student population, and we have so many people coming. And as I say, I worked in catering for years. I worked at the Glasgow School of Art, and you couldn't work in that environment without being able to do good vegan food, good vegetarian food and all that. And when you come to Glasgow as well, all of the different ethnicities that I'm talking about as well. You get great Indian food, and they do great vegan and vegetarian, and so do Chinese restaurants here as well. So there's an incredible variety, and it's spreading all over Scotland. You can go anywhere in Scotland now, and they have things. They understand veganism, they understand food restrictions and everything as well.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for one last time for those of you who are texting and asking me to put this back up again. I'm going to share this for our last question, and I'm going to catch you off guard, Austin, but I think you can handle it. Talk to us about movies, books, media, music, anything else that complements this area that we've just traveled to, and what could our listeners or our viewers access to continue the love that they now have for Western Scotland?
Do you know, I made up a list and I haven't typed it up, but I will send it to you in the next couple of days.
You can send it to me and I will post it with the recording.
Fantastic. Yes, I'll send it. I'll send it to you. Just really quickly before I answer that, I've just have seen somebody there asking wheelchair. Great wheelchair access around Scotland. We are very switched on for it. All taxis, great wheelchair access. Most hotels will have like loads of really good wheelchair access. By law, we have to have good wheelchair access everywhere in Scotland. It's part of our culture. If you're coming here to visit and you have a wheelchair, you're fine. Even at Edinburgh Castle, where it's very, very difficult to get into, they have service cars that take you in. But anyway, back to films, right?
That's awesome to know, actually, for accessibility for travelers, because that, you know, there's like 80% of people in the world have some accessibility issue, and it's great to know if it's a mobility issue, it can be overcome in Scotland.
It's right in the fabric of our society that we cater for people with a disability, because we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, as we say here in Scotland. So yeah, it's a good place to come. We have great accessibility. So let me start by saying, don't watch Braveheart. It's rubbish. It's really rubbish. There's
You
some.
might be killing your tips here, Austin. I'm not
No,
sure.
no. I, do you know what? I would rather have integrity than tips. Yeah, it's a wonderful romp, but the history's a bit off. A lot of great actors in it that I really like. My pal Peter Mullen is in it, and it's fun. But let me point you at some much more interesting films. The greatest Scottish film ever made is a lovely little love story called Gregory's Girl. So Gregory's Girl. It was made in 1980 by a film director called Bill. Hey, Gregory's Girl. I see. Oh, you've written it up. Thank you. Made in 1980. Thank you, Valerie Dunn. Gregory's Girl is this beautiful. It was made by a youth theatre group who made these like little shoestring films, and it's just this beautiful film about a gangly teenage boy who just doesn't fit in at school, who falls in love with this beautiful girl called Dorothy. She gets into the football team, so it's like all boys, and she's in the football team. And it's all about his story, and it's just teenage, and it's beautiful. It's just one of the greatest films ever made, Gregory's Girl. On a more gritty side, I see people mentioning Ian Rankin, who writes the Rebus novels there, which are crime fiction. I love Ian Rankin, and what I particularly love about him is also he has a great love of music. He really knows his popular music, and he writes novels based around a detective called Rebus. You can get television series. John Hannah starred as him, and Grant Stott. Somebody's asking, what about Stone of Destiny? I haven't seen Stone of Destiny. Stone of Destiny is a film about the 1951 stealing of the Stone of Destiny, which is a piece of stone that we used to crown the kings of Scotland right up until it was stolen by Edward I, which is part of the Braveheart story. He stole the Stone of Destiny and he put it in London. Some Scottish students from the University of Glasgow stole it in 1951, brought it back to Glasgow. I think it looks like a great romp, but I haven't seen it. So I haven't seen it at all.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to answer a few questions that came in, and then we'll wrap up. One question is this being recorded, and can you see it again? Yes, absolutely. You can watch the recordings on my website, on YouTube, and on Facebook. So every presentation we do is recorded and accessible to everybody. The second question is, how can we contact Austin afterwards? Does Austin have a website? If Austin chooses to, he can give me his email address, and I will include it in on the follow-up email tomorrow, so everybody on Zoom has a way to contact him. Austin, you can comment on whether you do private tours or not, but other people said, how do we get to do this tour in person? I can hook you up. I have connections to many groups that do these tours, and I can certainly book you on one of them. Austin guides for 2 of those companies, so if you are very lucky and or can request him for a private guide, he can certainly do that for you. Austin, I think I'm finished. If you are done, we can wrap up. You let me know if you have a parting word, and then we can all say goodbye for the night.
I have 2 things to say. Somebody's just asked for another book recommendation. Possibly the greatest modern Scottish novel of the last 40 years is a book called Lanark by Alistair Gray, Lanark, Alistair Gray. That's the greatest Scottish book of the last 40 years. It's incredible. Sorry if I scared you about Glasgow. It's not a scary place. It's a wonderful place, and we're full of humour. And thank you so much for having me again, Mara. It's been an absolute blast.
It's always great to see you, Austin. Have fun in Iceland, and we'll see you when you're back to Scotland. Everybody else, thank you very much for coming out again today, and we will see you next week. Take care and have a good day.